and welcome. This is the Eco Gitu podcast, and I am your host, Teresia Gital. Today, we will be looking at the role of women in environment, and there's an amazing lady who is joining us today. She is the former country director of Kenya Catholic Youth for Environmental Sustainability in Africa, and she's also the deputy executive director of this same organization, which is a youth-led organization that is faith-based, as you had before, and it is concerning itself with matters environment. And also, she is very passionate about women and also the role that women take in environment. Her name is Hellen Mugo. It's quite an honor to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
You're welcome. And as we look at the role of women in environment and just looking at what you have been advocating for, the first question that I would have is, why should women be involved in environment?
Mm-hmm. So I think we can look at it in two ways, because the environment and what happens in the environment heavily impacts women. And on the other hand, the activities that women do as they relate to the environment and everything on Earth also has a great impact on the environment. So there's a mutual two-way relationship between women and the environment, and we will look at that in more detail as we move along.
Because, okay, as you say, there are activities like it is a two-way street. What do you mean by that exactly?
So if we look at the environment as the most basic definition we're given in school was everything that is around us.
Yes, yes.
Whether it's in the homestead, outside, in school, at work, and so on. Everything we do relates to the environment, the food we eat, the water we use, the houses we live in. So whatever little thing that happens to the environment, when it's raining, when it's hot, it affects us. So any change in the environment will directly affect us. And any activity that we do in our house, in our workplaces, in our spaces of faith and so on, also again has a direct impact on the environment. So when we do good, is a positive impact on the environment. When the environment is okay, then we are okay. When something bad happens in the environment, there is, drought or some sort of natural disaster, again, it heavily impacts us. So that's the two-way relationship that we're talking about.
When I listen to you and you're saying the aspect of that is at work, there is also at home. So now that when I think of the word woman, is that there are different categories of women here. We're talking about the elderly women, we're talking about the urban and the rural. And just to break it up is I would want to hear what is the contribution of the elder woman to the environment and in general, not even like just one. I'm talking about all of them in general.
Okay. So elder women, I am thinking about our grandmothers and beyond. I don't know what category to put our mothers and ourselves in. I think we can still call ourselves young women.
Yes, we are.
So, the older women, I think, and the older generation generally, I think they had a very good relationship with the environment. They knew, they took only what they needed. They didn't have a lot of technology like we have today, that as much as it improves our lives in some ways is also to a great extent harmful to the environment. They took just what they needed. There was little wastage, there was little pollution. They respected all plants and animals and everything. And there was they were modest in their livelihood. So I think the older women had a great relationship with the environment. And I think as a result, they also faced less challenges than we do today. I imagine issues like pollution and diseases that come from unhealthy water. There's no food. There's all the challenges that come with modern day living.
Yeah. And as I listen to that, what you think that there was that respect, even though they were trying to take from the environment, they just took
Yes.
what they needed. And when I hear that, now it will bring me to now the modern day rural urban women, not rural urban, but rather, what is the role of the rural woman currently to the environment? Is it the same as the elder women, or is it a bit different?
Okay. So women in the rural areas relate very differently to a great extent, very differently from the women in the urban context. If we're looking at Kenya, for example, where we are, and a lot of other countries in Africa and other developing countries around the world, think about whether it's in Asia or Latin America and so on, a lot of rural women live on farms or depend on agriculture for a living. So even though to a great extent they do not, a lot of land is owned by men, even if it's on behalf of the family, and a lot of decisions again will be made by men, but the people who interact mostly with the soil, with the farms, with the animals, will be women. So the way I would say that the rural woman relates to nature is mostly through natural resources, the soil, because there will be a lot of farming, water. You know, in many urban places, you will be opening a tap and water comes out, or even in the slums where maybe there's no flowing water, there'll be a communal tap not far away. But in many places, we still have women going distances to fetch water in the river, and then they will go and till the land. They do not apply a lot of technology, so they will be doing it manually, planting, weeding, harvesting, and so on. So the rural woman interacts a lot with environment. She probably has some cows and goats and chicken that she feeds, and milks and so on. So her livelihood evolves around nature and these natural resources. So I believe, whether they are aware of it or not, there's a strong dependency between the rural woman and the environment around her. So, and even when they degrade the environment in that context, it is not a conscious thing, because, for instance, now we have people taking up things like chemicals to spray the farms and more fertilizers, as opposed to manure and so on. So when you're keeping livestock, again, you have carbon emissions. So we have these challenges and ways in which these rural women contribute to destruction of the environment. But I do not think many of them are even aware that this is harmful. If I do this, I am doing it to improve my yields, or for instance, but I may not be aware of what happens to, when it rains and there's runoff from that farm and so on. Yeah.
And just looking at that, as you had just started to hint, you're mentioning about the urban woman. And now when you look at the urban woman, I don't know, let us look at the older generation. What we leave the younger ones, and I'm wondering what is their contribution to the environment, be it the positive or even the negatives. I would really want to hear how they contribute to the environment.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So the modern woman, I think the most typical situation is where you have a job 8 to 5 or some other hours. So you leave the house in the morning, you come in the evening. Maybe you work from home, you're raising your kids and taking care of the family. Some have businesses, maybe employed, or you run a shop or something. So it's different. The day-to-day is very different from the typical rural woman. And so even the way they interact with the environment, again, is different in the urban setting. If you think about, for instance, cooking, in the village, maybe you have some firewood, you pick some branches from trees around, or you have charcoal or something. But the urban woman does not have so much space or such options. So maybe she uses the most common in our context is gas, LPG. She most likely has electricity in the house, unlike the rural woman. The biggest issues I think around with the modern women would be, for instance, waste management in terms of how do they impact the environment. I think in the rural places it's easier because food leftovers, you have chicken you can feed, you have cows that eat the peels and so on.
Yes.
You can throw the rest as manure. In the city or in the town, you don't really have that. So waste management is a big challenge in the urban context. You may want to, for instance, separate your waste, but how do you don't dispose of it at the end of the day. You just put it in a bin somewhere and it's collected. So even if you separate it, how sure are you that the county staff will, for instance, go and separate it and dispose of it properly? So waste management is a big challenge in the urban context. Food, in the context of food, here most of the time you're buying food from the market or from the kibanda, the kiosk next door, and sometimes you will not know the source. So that links you to what's happening in the rural context. So on a day-to-day, as we're saying, the modern woman most of the time will be working, and so that brings us to, there's a house help maybe, or everybody leaves in the morning, the children go to school, and you don't spend so much time at home. So your relationship with the environment will be focused maybe at the workplace. How do you manage resources at work? Where exactly do you work? Are you a decision maker at work, or is there someone that supervises you and makes the decisions? In the context of the home, there's one more issue in the urban context that you can think about. Where exactly is this home that you live in? Are you, in the slums maybe? Are you in the middle class with a home somewhere? Are you maybe in a nice residential place if you have money and so on? So, because the issues that we can think about, we talked about waste management, the issues of urban planning. What contexts are you living in, and what impact does that have on your family and the daily life? So I think that is the context of the urban woman.
And I think that is quite profound, because there's that difference of solid waste management that you've touched on, and also the fact that now there's also the class, whether you're upper, you're middle, or you're living in a low income area. So that you are affected by and you affect the environment differently. And looking at that, I just want to see, how does now the environment affect, because now there's also that aspect of pollution that has been happening, right? And it's even as we live in a modern day society, there is environmental pollution, and I want to see, how does it affect the urban and the women? Like I want to see that comparison.
Okay. I think we can look at pollution in a number of ways, or different kinds of pollution. Take for instance air pollution.
Yes.
It's a bigger challenge, I would say, in urban areas. You and I are in Nairobi currently,
yes.
And I think that's a really serious challenge in Nairobi right now, air pollution. I don't know if you've ever, when you're approaching the city from a distance, and you just you can see the buildings as you're approaching. It always looks very dark and smoggy, like there's smoke or fire somewhere. So you can imagine the level of pollution that makes it look like that. When you're approaching some place, a country, you'll be seeing the blue sky and it's clear.
Yes.
As you're approaching the city, and there has been research done, and the levels of pollution in Nairobi are alarming. It's beyond what is acceptable for for people to live in. Okay, so that means that the people living there, including the women we're talking about, are at a higher risk, because that's the air you breathe in, whether you are work or, living at home around the city. So that's a big challenge. The water that you drink, most of us rely on tap water, and sometimes there's no water, so you buy with the mitungis, the jerry cans.
Yes.
But you're never sure exactly. We believe it's sourced, it's brought, most of it is supplied through the county government. But we have instances where it gets mixed up with sewage or dirty water. Have you ever opened the taps and the water smells or looks bad? So that's a big challenge that the people in the urban areas are facing. And if you're thinking now about women, these are the people who will be cooking most of the time, and supplying water. They're the ones who know what water the family is drinking, for instance, the children and everyone else. So pollution at that level, the air pollution, and then the solid waste again is a big challenge. Plastics everywhere. In some places there's even no proper garbage collection system. In some places people are actually charged for it, but the services are terrible. So those are some of the challenges that the rural people will not face so much, because if it's air pollution, for example, it may not be such a big challenge. There's a lot of space. The population is much lower.
Yes.
Water, you can fetch water. Most of them will have a system to collect water, like gutters around the house to collect rainwater, which at least you know of the source. The air may be polluted, but at least this came from the rain. Soil pollution now will be a challenge on the rural setting, and not so much in the urban setting, because it's a country where the farms are, and that's where the food is grown. So soil pollution in that case will be a bigger challenge, because of the people, whether they are in the village or in town, are going to eat that food. So any chemicals, any unhealthy stuff that goes to the soil, either directly, maybe through fertilizers or through runoff from other places, will get to the food, and it's a bigger challenge of country, because that's where the food is growing. So I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, you have.